Well, hi, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. For those who don't know me, my name is Patrick Brazeau. I'm an Algonquin from Maniwaki, Quebec, which is just a short drive north of our nation's capital, where the games get played. And I would like to acknowledge the Kwantlen people on the traditional territory where we stand on here today to have the fortunate time to meet, and I would like to thank all of you for being here, whether you had to or not. It's just great to be here, and I'd like to thank Lisa for inviting me to be here, and to Bruce Ferguson, which he didn't mention this. We are cousins, but this is the first time we actually met, so it is a small world. So it's all good. My presentation, I'll try to keep it as short as I possibly could, and I would like to entertain a question and answer period. I like that kind of interaction if possible, and feel free to ask any questions at the end of my presentation. So on the, I have nothing written, I have nothing prepared. Each time we get asked to make types of presentations, we think, who the audience will be, what they might like to hear, what they may not like to hear, put things down on paper, but I usually tend to fly by the seat of my pants as much as possible. And I say what I believe in. I'm a person of principle. You may not like what I have to say, you may like what I have to say, but at least one thing you get out of this, and by the way, I'm still Canada's youngest senator, and I turned 43 this past Saturday, so I still brag. I still have the bragging rights on that one. So, like I said, just thinking about what I should talk about, and I'm still not sure, but let me give it a shot. Let's talk about politics a little bit. I don't know if anybody out of you are interested in politics or not, but let me say one thing: politics is dirty. It's sometimes a sham. And maybe sometimes it's organized legal crime. Who knows? When I was asked to come here, I was told that it'd be for a criminology class, and I'm like, ooh, with everything that I've been through in the last couple of years, talking about crime, maybe it's not a good idea to show up. But you know what? I've been charged with a lot of things. Let me break the ice. I've been charged with a lot of things, and I was at one point one individual who didn't believe in too much in Canada's justice system. I didn't think there was a justice system. I thought it was a legal system. And what I mean by a legal system is that it's all about judges, lawyers, delays, about money, administration. But I went through the justice system, and I believe in the justice system now, because to make a long story short, and it's out there, it's in the media, I was charged with many different things, and I got acquitted of everything. And let me just say from the onset, it's not because, some people believe that, some individuals get off on charges because of high-priced lawyers or connections of who they know. And remember what I just said: money and connections of people you may know. I started my career with the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples. I was a summer student there, doing research. And this organization is an organization that represented every First Nation, Métis, and Aboriginal person in Canada, but who lived off reserve. Now, there's other organizations as well, but the Congress of Aboriginal Peoples was one. And the affiliate here at the time in BC was the United Native Nations, which you probably heard about, but are now a defunct organization. But anyway, I started my career there as a summer student in 2001. Fast forward 2004, I became the vice chief of the organization, an elected position. In 2006, the national chief of that organization. And 2 years after that, in 2008, I got a call from then Prime Minister Stephen Harper asking me, well, would you like to sit in the Senate, considering that there's a seat open in Quebec, and you're from Quebec, and I kind of like you. And so I said, yes, I'd like to sit in the Senate. And I'll tell you why I decided that I would sit in the Senate. I was a national chief trying to make changes for Canada's off-reserve population as best as I could. And it was difficult because it was always having to fight and negotiate with not only the federal government, but also the provincial governments. So it was very difficult. So I saw this opportunity, being asked to sit in the Senate. Well, I'm going to be right there in the game, part of the game, and being there to instill changes with, you know, the non-Indigenous members of Parliament and whatnot. And so I was there, and, you know, for people who know me, I'm kind of like, you know, I'm kind of a loyal person. I'm an honest person. Like I said, you may not like what you hear from me, but I'm blunt. I'm straightforward. And I like to argue, and I like to debate, and sometimes I win, sometimes I lose. But so I was part, at that time, of the Conservative Party. And I was loyal. You know, I was one of 7 Indigenous representatives of that party at that time. But, you know, for those who followed the career a little bit, well, at some point it started to go downhill. And it started to go downhill with the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Because even though I was part of the Conservative Party at that time, you know, we had national caucus meetings every Wednesday where all the members of Parliament of the Conservative Party with the senators all met in one room, and we had direct access to the Prime Minister. And at one point I rose, and because the Prime Minister at the time and the party at the time did not want to have an inquiry on missing and murdered Indigenous women. And so in the back rooms, like talking with the Prime Minister and others, the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs, for the need to have an inquiry, at every turn they shut me down. And so at one point, I brought in to that caucus meeting in front of the Prime Minister, I stood at the mic, and I took out 7 or 8 volumes. And those volumes was that there was an inquiry here in BC about the missing salmon stock. So I put the volumes of books on the desk. I said, you know, salmon is important for the economy for fishermen and the like. But how can we have multi-million-dollar inquiries on missing salmon stock and have absolutely nothing for human beings? And so that kind of was the beginning of my downward spiral with the Conservative Party, because I believe, and perhaps this is just my perception, but I firmly believe that it was at that instant that I sort of broke ranks with the Conservative Party because of this issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women. We needed to have an inquiry. Now, I'm not going to get into the issues of today's inquiry. The inquiry is there, and it will let the people do the good work that they need to do, even though there has been some flaws and etc. But I don't want to talk about that today. But just to say that when you stand up contrary to a political party's vision, well, those people take great risks, because you have the political party and their power, and it's not about the individuals. It's not about doing the right thing. It's not about doing the right thing for people. It's about what the party believes, and we got to stick to that. And I'll remember, and this is being filmed by APTN in the back, the Aboriginal People's Television Network. I used to go on the panel there when I was a conservative, a member of the Conservative Party. I used to go on the panel, but with representatives of the Liberal Party and the NDP at the time. Once a week, we go debate ongoing issues. But each political party, before you go on TV to answer questions and to debate with others, they give you a piece of paper and they have written bullets of what has to be said. And this is every party, not just the Conservative Party, every party. So this is why when you see news interviews oftentimes and people debating, they'll try to repeat the same point that they make, because that comes from the political party. And at one point, I decided to back off from appearing on those panels, because I didn't believe, personally, based on principle, what I was being given by non-Indigenous people within the Conservative Party to say about and for Indigenous people. So I told them, F off. So fast forwarding, again, like I said, I started my career at a very young age. I'm still young, but I went up very high, and the sky was the limit, and everything was there. I mean, job security, money. I had colleagues supporting, or I thought they were supporting. And then started getting into some personal problems and professional problems. And just before, because at one point I got suspended without pay from the Senate, but just before that, I used to be the vice chair of the Senate Human Rights Committee. And at that time, I wanted to introduce a study to look at the rights and benefits and the human rights of off-reserve Aboriginal peoples across this country, because it had never been done. Because the federal government, they believe that they have jurisdiction for, pardon the language, but Indians living on reserve only. And so if you live off reserve, then the federal government says, well, you're provincial jurisdiction. But I haven't seen a provincial premier anywhere that has agreed to say, oh yeah, we have jurisdiction. So it's jurisdictional wrangling between the federal and provincial governments. And so I went contrary to the Conservative Party at the time, because they wanted nothing to do with this study, because it was going to cost millions, and they didn't know how it was going to end up as a conclusion. But at that time, I did what I had to do, and I lobbied members of my committee. I was Conservative, so I lobbied members of the Liberal members in that committee to support my study. So I called, at one point, a surprise vote to have a vote on my study, and it went through. So this was in the fall of 2012. Now, something happened to me on a personal level in February of 2013, where I was suspended. And to make a long story short, here's how politics works. This is why I said it's dirty, but this is my view at that time, but it's not necessarily always dirty. But we had started this study, we had started traveling, and ironically, the last time I had a public appearance, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, was about 5 years ago, and it was here in Vancouver. So this is my first public appearance, aside from a few media opportunities in the last 5 years. But again, 2012, here's this study. We started traveling. We started meeting with off-reserve Indigenous peoples across the country. Something happens to me in February of 2013 where I get suspended. And the Conservative government at that time, because they were the government, decided to pull the study. Now, that study was not about me. It was about the rights and benefits and the human rights of off-reserve Indigenous peoples. But I no longer had a seat. I could no longer voice my issue with that, because this study was about people, not about me. But the Conservative government at that time pulled it, and nobody said anything. And here we are 5 years later, still nothing happened with that study. So that's why I said politics is dirty. It's about their own self-serving interests.
Which study are you referring to?
The off-reserve, the human rights of off-reserve Aboriginal people in Canada. So anyway, it got pulled just a few months after it got introduced. So a lot of money went into that, but no solutions, no recommendations, no nothing. Absolutely nothing. And so, like I said, sometimes you rise quickly, but the tumble could be as quick, and that's what happened to me. And I taught, like I said, I mean, I can't hide that fact. If you Google my name, you'll see everything that's been in the media. But beware sometimes what you read in the media, because like I said, I went through the justice system. I went to the courts. I went through a lengthy personal case. And sometimes what the media writes is not even close to the reality that you're living in a courtroom. So if ever you have a chance to go into a courtroom, especially on criminal cases, I would invite you to do so, because even I learned a lot because I was, defending myself. And like I mentioned about money and connections, well, in the last couple of years, like I said, I rose very quickly in my career, went through some tough times, and I hit rock bottom. And when I say rock bottom, it's not just my ego rock bottom. I hit rock bottom not ego-wise. It tainted my relationships with my family, with my children. By the way, I'm a father of 5. I have 2 boys and 3 girls. it ruined some of those, or it affected some of those relationships. The colleagues that I thought that I had in the Senate turned out to be, let's see, 0. I'll say maybe 1 or 2, not 0, maybe 1 or 2 out of 105. So it's tough, but I hit rock bottom. No more money. Nothing. No connections. So when people say, well, maybe he just got off because of who he is and because he's got money, and, well, you know what? I had no money. I had no connections, and who cares who I was? I was just in the news for negative things. So who really was I? But I had to go through that. It was tough. And, you know, I'm not going to get into specific details about, you know, those struggles in the last couple of years, but it's not easy for anybody, whether you're a man or a woman, to be accused, one, but to be wrongly accused of something, and you can't say anything to defend yourself. Like, I love to defend myself. I love to debate. I know I'm respectful, but I'm not always right. And, you know, I'll be the first to admit that. But, you know, as soon as you're accused of something in the criminal sense, well, the first thing your lawyer tells you is, don't say anything, could be used against you. Well, we know that. But it's true. I was in a position where I wanted to defend myself. I had facts. I had everything to be able to defend myself, but I couldn't. I had to shut up. And for the first time in my life, I found that difficult because my life was not under my control or in my life. It was in the control of somebody else's hands. And that's not easy. So, like I said, it was rough. I mean, I never thought that I would see the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak. And at one point, I even tried to commit suicide. And not once, but twice. And I have the scars to show it. There's one here, and there's one here. The last one, which dates just under 2 years ago, it wasn't a question of being too full of myself. It wasn't a question of, you know, it's about me. It was just, I just couldn't see my way out of this. And so I tried to slit my throat. And, you know, I'm glad I failed because I'm here today. But after I tried to commit suicide, I woke up. I was in a induced coma for 2 days. And when I woke up, a doctor came and just did the regular test to make sure that I was okay. And he sat on my bed for about, I'd say a good half hour. And that day marked, it was a changing time in my life because I never thought a doctor would take that much time for a patient. And he did. He sat on the bed and he just said, you know what, you're one lucky son of a bitch because you almost didn't miss yourself. But he says, don't worry, everything is going to be okay. Everything is intact. But he just told me, he says, I followed you for the last couple of years in your career. And he says, you're better than that. So he directed me to the help that I needed to get on a personal level to get back on the right track. And it was tough. It wasn't easy. You know, substance abuse. I did it. Been there, done that. And one thing I never did, though, is look at myself as a victim, even though in the back of my head it's sort of hard not to because I know some of the bad things that people have done to me. But, you know, I'm not a victim. And who cares about revenge? It would be so easy to try and seek revenge on everybody that did anything nasty or did anything negative to me. And I have no regrets. Perhaps one. I was thinking about this in the last couple of days. I don't have too many regrets in life because on the one hand, if I had regrets, then it wouldn't make me the strong person or the person that I am today. But one of the regrets that I do have is that perhaps I surrounded myself with the wrong people. And that I did. And there were people who instead of helping me and giving me a push up, that they would drag me down and make me feel sorry for myself, and getting into that that way of thinking. And that wasn't me, but it was hard with substance abuse. But now, I mean, I'm still seek counseling because I need it, but I'm a happier, healthier, and better person. Well, if I'm not there to try and make things better the best that I can, then who will? And so Aboriginal advocacy, or advocacy in general, is important. It changes people's lives, but sometimes it takes a long time. Because there was a point in the last 5 years that I just want to give up on Aboriginal issues because I wasn't getting anywhere. And I'm not one with a lot of patience. And, you know, I don't get angry or fly off the handle, but I tried different ways or different maneuvers to convince people, but it wasn't working. So I had told myself, like, I'll try something different. I'll go other committees and just take a break from Aboriginal issues. But I decided otherwise. You know, committees in the Senate will be reconstituted because there's a lot more independent senators today. So it's not just Conservatives and Liberals, it's Conservatives, Liberals, and a lot of independents. So I'm going to sit on that committee again because it's important for the Aboriginal peoples of this country. And, you know, like I said, I'm one lucky son of a gun to be here. I thank you. I was going to talk about, you know, boxing, but I said, yeah, that's not really important anymore. It's done and over with. But if you feel that you have to ask questions about it, please feel free. Anything, I'm fair game. If I feel I don't want to, or I shouldn't, or it's inappropriate to answer a question, I won't. And if I do, I will. I mean, I'm that open. And so I'll open up the floor. But the message, like the first speaker and the second as well, as Native people were fighters. I'm talking about boxing. Here's the analogy. Boxing is a lot like politics. If you're weak, you're going to get weeded out. If you're strong, you're going to have the power. But it's to find that balance between the both. Because if you find too much power, at one point it'll bite you in the butt. If you're too low or too weak, same thing unfortunately will happen. So it's to find that balance. And that balance is hard to find in politics because the Senate is there, and a lot of people don't know this, but it's there to represent minorities in Canada. And I'm sitting last Thursday in the Senate introducing my amendment. I was all excited. I'm like, this is the right thing to do based on principle. But because not only based on principle, but my young daughter is affected by the decision. And I didn't want, you know, 5 or 10 years down the road, having my daughter ask me, well, why were you sitting there and you had an opportunity to do something and you didn't do it? And I went against a lot of my Indigenous colleagues in the Senate by trying to introduce this amendment because I was rocking the boat somehow. Well, so be it. It was the right thing to do. I'm going to continue rocking that boat if it makes sense. So like I said, boxing and politics is the same thing. It's about surviving. And, you know, in my professional and personal struggles, I've survived. I'm not out of the woods yet. It's a work in progress, but damn, it's great to live. It's great to wake up in the morning. It's great to have something to do, something to aim for. Everybody goes through struggles. Everybody has their own issues. It's not always easy. You know, sometimes life sucks. Life is tough. Sometimes it's bullshit. But you gotta get up and fight.